Hello there, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, right after this. You know, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. That's right, simply go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. As promised, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor Stephen Dinan. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
Viral video shows illegal immigrants released at the border. Am I correct? These are young men being allowed in and then scattered about the country?
Yeah, single adult men, and that's interesting. For the last year, we'd known that catch and release at the border was back, but we'd thought it was largely families. The Biden administration had told us, yeah, we're still removing single adult men, but families, they're tougher, and for a bunch of different reasons, where we are catching and releasing them. This viral video captured by Fox reporters in southern Texas shows single adult men, busloads of them essentially, being dropped off and given taxi rides to an airport, and then the Fox folks talk to them, and they're saying they're heading to all over the country, right? They're going deeper into the country, after having been caught and released. We're a year into the Biden administration, and it's really stunning the difference in the border now versus a year ago at the end of the Trump administration. You and I have talked about the numbers and sort of the human stories behind it, but it's worth going over them again. And every time I write one of these stories, I just sit back and I sort of marvel at how dramatically things have changed. So there was a period at the start of the coronavirus pandemic when we were at literally the lowest numbers of border crossers, as judged by the number of people that the Border Patrol is arresting, the lowest number of illegal border crossers dating back to the early 1970s. Just, absolutely stunning numbers. We just finished 2021, the calendar year, with 2 million illegal immigrant apprehensions or encounters at the border, by far a record for any calendar year. December was the worst December on record. It's not just the illegal immigrants being caught. Drug seizures are way up, and just the number of the people, agents say if they're catching more, it means more are getting through. So it's really tough to overstate just how bad the border is. Sort of to put a fine point on it, the administration finally released its border numbers on, I think, the 24th day of the month of January. They were finally released their December numbers. They still haven't released their final fiscal year 2021 ICE operations numbers. That's now basically 4 months after the fiscal year ended. They haven't released those numbers. The data looks so bad for them that they're struggling, first of all, to release it, second of all, to explain it. In the statement, when they released those December border numbers, the new commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, who oversees all of these numbers, went on and on about stopping things coming through airports, because the ports of entry are all under the same agency that the Border Patrol is. He talked on and on about how what a great job they were doing stopping counterfeit products coming through airports, and barely mentioned the awful numbers at the border, because there really isn't anything that they can say other than, well, we're trying very hard. And that's not very convincing right now.
I'm going to stay with immigration for a minute. Smuggler who used Coffin to move illegal immigrants pleads guilty. Pretty sloppy about it, huh?
It's this. You and I talked about some of the crazy methods and tactics. This one is one of my favorites. I can say that partially because nobody died in the incident, which makes it a little lighthearted. But yeah, the guy came through a checkpoint in southern Texas, along one of the main roads coming up from deep southern Texas, the Brownsville area and whatnot, towards up towards Houston, and so it gets that checkpoint gets a lot of activity, and so agents were there manning it. A Dodge Caravan minivan came up to the checkpoint, and the agent, who happened to be the primary agent there said, "Hey, what you doing?" And the guy, "What are you carrying in the back?" And the guy points and says, "Dead guy, Navy guy." Turns out that the agent was a military veteran who was like, "This does not strike me as a military. This is not how the military military would transport a dead body, a veteran or an active duty guy who died in the line of duty. For one, the coffin was old and beat up. For another, the American flag had been sort of duct taped, essentially, or package taped to the top of the coffin, and everything about it just struck the guy. That, the U.S. military, that if it does a lot of things right, but one thing it makes sure it gets right is the honors for a dead service member or dead veteran. This struck the guy as completely wrong, given that, and so he asked another agent to come by, another agent who also had military experience, and that agent was happened to, he was the guy who was running the K9 unit, and the K9 unit alerted to the vehicle. So sure enough, they popped the lid of the coffin, and there are two Mexican illegal immigrants who had been packed inside there. Two guys inside the same coffin.
Huh.
They said they'd been struggling to breathe and were sort of thankful to be let out. They, for what it's worth, you can sort of tell from the complaint that the Border Patrol agents filed, or the affidavit that they wrote about the incident, that the migrants were sort of relieved. They found they had to pull the coffin lid on top of themselves, and they found the whole experience obviously very frightening.
Wow. OSHA cancels business vaccine mandate after Supreme Court loss. This is a pretty big deal affecting millions and millions, right?
Yeah, this is the big business mandate that would have applied to businesses with 100 or more workers. It was basically 2/3 of the private sector workforce, about 90 to 95 million workers were to be affected by this mandate. The Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago came in and said, "Hey, this thing looks pretty sketchy to us. We don't think you have the power to do it." For what it's worth, the justices indicated that Congress could do this, and states could do this, but they said the power belongs to Congress. Congress could even give that power to the executive branch, to the Biden administration, or any president, to go ahead and impose a mandate like this. It's not that a mandate is unconstitutional in theory, but that Congress hadn't ever done that, and that the Biden administration couldn't suddenly claim powers to do that because there's no indication that Congress ever gave them that power. So the Supreme Court's ruling was a preliminary ruling. It basically said, while this case is going along in the lower courts, you cannot keep the mandate in place. There's a chance that a lower court could have come in and said, "Oh, actually, after investigating this, we decided that there is that power." By withdrawing the rule, by canceling this emergency standard, that can no longer happen. OSHA is basically saying, yeah, we bungled. But there's a big caveat to that. OSHA did say, you know what? While we're canceling the emergency standard, which we implemented basically on an emergency basis and just slapped there on our own say-so, we are going to go through normal regulatory process to try and write this rule more permanently, essentially. They are arguing that they believe they still do have the power, despite this very, very stark Supreme Court ruling. They're arguing that they still have the power, and they're going to try and revive it. Now, I don't know where we are in the course of the pandemic by the time they get around to actually finishing that. And given what the Supreme Court said in its ruling, I can't imagine that they're going to find the courts particularly eager to embrace that theory that the administration actually does have this power after the way the Supreme Court ruled. But it's interesting that while they've removed the immediate emergency standard, the immediate deadline for companies to get vaccinated, the administration said, "No, we're going to try again, though. Don't worry, we're coming back."
All right, before I let you run, what are you working on?
Justice Breyer retirement announcement. Obviously, fairly fresh news, but it's a major. I mean, every Supreme Court nomination is a major issue here in Washington. It sort of underscores just how much both Congress and the president, and the states for that matter, have ceded, how much power they've ceded to the Supreme Court, that these nomination battles become all-consuming because so much is decided by so few people at the Supreme Court. But, just sort of the outlines of it. Justice Breyer was appointed by President Clinton. So the seat is already essentially a liberal justice sitting in that seat. President Biden will get a chance to appoint another liberal justice to it. It won't change the ideological divides on the court. What it does do is give Democrats and liberal activists a chance to basically reload that seat with somebody 30 years younger who can hold that seat for decades to come. And it prevents, if Breyer had stayed and had retired, say, a year from now, if Republicans held control of the Senate, they could obviously shape what justice came through. Or if he'd stayed for another few years and there'd been a Republican president, then the seat could have been filled by a Republican president. So the key to Breyer retiring now is that it gives Democrats a chance to reload that seat with somebody younger and prevent a Republican appointee from getting that seat in the future.
Gotcha. Folks, you can read all of Stephen Dinan's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. As always, thank you, Stephen.
My pleasure, Andy.
Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Dinan. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.